Hello, welcome back to another video. I have the honor to introduce today's guest, Dr. Stockard. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Stockard. Would you please introduce a little bit about yourself and your work?
Okay. I'm was a professor for many years, and the reason I'm here today is my work that has been involved chemistry graduate students and faculty in issues of equity and discrimination and advancement in their careers. It's work that I've been doing for probably about the last 20, 25 years in collaboration with physical scientists.
hmm That's lovely to hear. And just a little bit about your work specifically, this paper. What exactly motivated you guys to, study this topic? Like, I read in the significance part that you guys saw the Black Lives Matter movement and was kind of inspired to study, systemic discrimination. But was there any other factors that contributed to it?
Oh, excellent question. Excellent question. You're talking about some of the recent work we did. We had done work that looked at the careers of women and minorities as much as we could in the United States. And we'd also been talking to and working with women in other countries throughout the world, women in STEMs, to work together to try and help bolster each other and to
Yeah.
make sure that it's all okay, that things get better.
There's a big discussion around the epidemic of loneliness these days. Everyone's so lonely, and it's apparently a huge health problem.
Oh, yes, it is. It is. Some of my work is on health. And we know there is a lot of data about loneliness is a big contributor to health.
But as we're talking about, as we're saying, uh, definitely, I feel like COVID maybe hasn't impacted me personally very much, but I feel like people around me and teachers at my school has definitely expressed that it's a big issue and a big health hazard to students who went through that period because now they have a difficulty in communication, and communication is so important when it comes to learning. And they've expressed that it's like a huge issue.
As I would imagine. And the friendship, the building of friendship, um,
Mhm.
the the interpersonal relations, that is really so important.
Yeah, but let's move on to the next question. Uh, just out of curiosity, how many sociology?
Oh my goodness sakes. I'm actually cleaning out all of my old files. So I think the first project did was 1968 as an undergraduate with funding
Wow.
from the National Science Foundation. And I recently found the paper that I did at that point and then worked for 1 year between undergraduate and graduate school. So yes, it's now been well over 50 years that I've been working in this. And it's because it's fun. And
As you're saying, you think your motivation to, continuing research all these years is because of your love for sociology, right?
yes, yes. And also trying to figure out how the world works, why it works the way it does. And I've also always, from the beginning, been interested in inequalities and discrimination and how the world can become a better place, one in which everybody can live to their full potential and in which everybody's treated fairly. And
Mhm.
that is can really be that's been a focus of my work and trying to understand why things are the way they are, and then if we can understand that, we can make the world better, and that has really been a motivating factor.
Mhm. I can see that. And actually, this is something I've always wanted to ask an expert. So, through this channel, I've been able to interview a lot of Saudi women who work in Saudi companies, whether it's in tech or communications or what is it, human resources. And I've actually found that a lot of them express, they feel more supported because they're women. But what do you think of this phenomenon?
Oh, that's yes, that actually gets to some really interesting kinds of elements that I actually wrote about many years ago about the different aspects of our lives. So that one in some societies where, for instance, the role of wife might seem to be one where women are really under control of men. They don't have much power, but the role of mother can be immensely powerful. And so that it can be one that brings a great deal of prestige. It brings a great deal of power, uh, and and also the aspects of power and reinforcement can change through one's life, through the life course. So that, for instance, a society in which a great deal of power falls on the mother-in-law, her daughter-in-law may be feeling quite dreadful when she has to move into the home of her mother-in-law. Say, it could happen in India, but she will become a mother-in-law at some point, and the whole picture will change.
Mhm.
So what this shows is that social life is complex. And it's not just one size fits all or one explanation fits all, but that it actually is complex. And so that's nice that they feel as though they are supported. And yeah, and I wouldn't doubt that one little bit. And perceptions are, it may seem to those of us on the outside, how can they think that? But perceptions are very important, and the subtlety of figuring out in what ways, why is this, that also is important. That's a lovely insight, by the way. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I found that, through interviewing these people, I feel like even though I've lived in Saudi for so many years, my perception of how their lives might maybe outside is completely changed. And let's talk a little bit more about your paper on graduate students in chemistry and underrepresented minority. So, what does it mean to be systemically discriminating against someone?
As we use that term to describe the way in which inequalities are built into a system and that they're very hard to get rid of and that they continue. And even when we have laws that say one shouldn't do this, they can continue to persist. And this gets back to the notion of different levels. They can often be seen in very subtle interactions uh, and in ways that we wouldn't expect. And that was one of the very sad things that came out of the analysis of that data was the what could only be described as discrimination that wasn't obvious from the beginning. Two examples. One involved funding. If we looked at the first year of funding for graduate students, the minority students who identified themselves as a minority, tended to do quite well in having funding from their departments. There really weren't differences. If anything, they were getting a little bit more money. But as time went on, they actually had less money. And
Mhm.
they were from families that didn't have the resources to support them. And what we believe was happening was that the departments were saying, come study with us and we'll give you a lot of money for your first year. But then they didn't continue the funding. So these poor students are between a rock and a hard place. They
Mhm.
had enough time in their graduate program that they were getting closer to finishing, but they were running up debt. They were significantly more likely to have to do loans and work outside of their graduate program to support themselves. And so it's a very difficult situation for them. And I think this involved the systematic racism and inequalities within the larger society, where minority families are far less likely to have the wealth that others have. And it also reflected, I think, the very hidden, subtle attitudes of those within the department, thinking, oh, well, we gave them a lot their first year, we'll just sort of let them go on. And
Mhm.
those are the kinds of things that I don't think we're always aware of, but which are real. And the second one, which I found really disturbing, involved um, the interactions that people had with others. And we had a question that said, who do you get support from? Who can you turn to for help when you need it? And then, and we had there was a whole list of questions like your peers, your teachers, your family, and so on. And then it was followed by a question, how much support would you like to have from them? And framed in a way where we could compare. And the really sad thing, the only group that wasn't getting the kind of support that they really wanted and would want more were men who identified as underrepresented minorities. And it was from their peers. And so
Mhm.
that is so subtle. It's so subtle. But it gets down to the little things of who will you invite to your house? Who will you go out to coffee with? Who will you joke with and be friends with? And these poor folks were saying, I'm not getting the kind of support from peers that I would like to have. And I think that reflects systematic racism and systematic inequality on a very personal level that we don't talk about or think about. It was really very, very disturbing.
Mhm. And why, do you have any insights on as to why these people, may feel that way?
The why the people who said that they would like more support or their peers.
Or I guess, why do you think their peers aren't giving them enough support? Is there like any specific
Uh,
reason?
I think it is. I think it just involves this ongoing uncomfortableness. The tradition of segregation in the United States is so embedded that many people do not grow up with friends and buddies from a different culture or a different background. And so they're just not comfortable with it. There are some fascinating studies that have found that the best way to break down barriers is to have people working together toward a common goal. And
Mhm.
so some of the best relationships develop on sports teams where you bring together people from a whole variety of backgrounds and they're working toward a common goal. They all know who are the good players, and the good players don't aren't those of a certain background. They're those who are the best athletes, and so we find that there can be long-term, comfortable, good relationships that aren't related to social background in these kinds of relationships, and we know that's the best way to develop it. But because those kinds of situations are relatively rare, people aren't practiced and aren't ready, aren't used to doing that.
Mhm.
Now, I think that STEM provides a way to do this as it becomes more diverse. Because what happens in the lab environment is you throw a lot of people together and they can develop friendships there and they can develop understandings and working toward the common goal and knowing that everybody's facing the same problem. But I think it
Mhm.
also involves reaching out and reaching beyond that. And each individual, looking out for the other person. Back to the whole thing with COVID and loneliness, and saying, "Yeah, let's go have coffee or let's chat." Or yeah, I think it does just involve. Also, we all need to start doing that more. Just reaching out a bit.
Mhm. Just have compassion for one another. I think that's a big thing.
Yes, yes, you're so right. The compassion. Yes, yes.
Mhm. And to move on, one more question about the paper, and
Uh-huh.
actually all of your studies, because it seems as if you not only wrote this one paper, but a couple others as well. Um, how has things changed over the years when it comes to supporting underrepresented minorities in science? Do you think we have moved, like, taken big steps towards a more inclusive STEM field?
Yes, yes, I do. I do. And to some people, it seems like it's very, very slow. But in
Mhm.
fact, the numbers are changing. More students are being admitted. More people are aware of the issues. And I think that's part of it. And there are also movements on a national scale to address this. So there's a set of chemistry departments in the United States that belong to something called a bridge program that's very, very actively working on trying to support students from minority backgrounds when they come and working with each other to try and do that. There are other programs that involve mentoring and trying to help people become better mentors. And so I do think it's getting better. But I'm also looking at this from more than 50-year perspective. So That's, yeah, and so when you're in the midst of it, it may seem very, very slow. And it's only when you step back and you sort of say, okay, things really are better. But and it's also the kind of thing where you have a few steps forwards and then things might get worse. But yeah, I do think it's getting better. And the fact that numbers are changing is making a big, big difference. Um,
Hmm.
it, when I started as a sociologist, it was still relatively rare for women to be in sociology, and then it changed massively. Now women are about half of all chemistry graduate students, and so that has really, really changed, and it's going to continue to change. And so that it really bodes well for the future. And the numbers are creeping up of people from minority backgrounds as well. And so that
Hmm.
also is very good.
Definitely. And you talked about numbers a lot. So I'm wondering, what kind of measurements can we make when it comes to measuring how equal a company or a lab is?
Oh, excellent question. Yes, there are a lot of ways of doing that. You could do simple things like looking at organizational charts and seeing
Hmm.
how many people are in management positions and how many people aren't. You can also, in some areas, you can get information on salaries. For instance, in public universities in the United States, you can usually get information on how much people are earning, and you can compare the salaries of men and women, and some places even of those who identify as a minority and those who don't. And then apart from the public information, you can also, there are lots and lots of surveys and sets of interviews and so on with people that ask about perceptions. And those are also, if they're well done, they're nice, valid sources of information about how things are going. And you also can often see how receptive an organization is by what they're willing to share. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of STEM researchers go into industry and into the government. And if an industry is open about that, versus they might have climate surveys, do they put out that information, or if people ask about it, do they have it out there? But you can definitely find this kind of thing. Sometimes it takes a bit of digging, but it's definitely there.
Hmm. That's very insightful. And what about when it comes to qualitative data? How can you use that to, support your hypothesis or, I mean, whatever it is you do in your experimental design? I mean, because it's quite hard, isn't it, to really formulate your entire paper or research on just people's perception, because that can change so easily from one person to another.
Oh, yes. Well, it turns out that perceptions across certain people are relatively constant, but there are ways of statistically testing that. And so that's what we do. We see how variable is it, and if people if it seems like they're different, is does this variability, this difference, how variable the answers are, does that mean that any little differences we're seeing aren't there? So we have developed amazing statistical tools in the last decades that really help us do this with great, great, great care. And also what we do when we have we will sometimes have hundreds of comments from graduate students, and we will go through them and very carefully we will analyze them. We'll start to group them. We'll say, okay, all of these people are talking about how I have a nasty advisor. And so we'll put those comments over here. And all of these comments are saying, oh, my advisor really is helpful and listens to me. And somebody else will be saying, my advisor is just never in the office. And so those will go into a pot. And you're essentially sorting them out. And and this is, of course, because I do a lot of quantitative work. So then once I get those sorted out, then I start counting and figuring out, do they differ in other kinds of ways? Now, one of the very interesting things that happened is that, as you can imagine from reading the paper on graduate students, a lot of students thought their advisor was not especially nice to them. And this is also a way, by the way, in which students can make a difference, really holding advisors accountable. But the
Mhm.
interesting thing was that everybody, there were no differences in the number of men and women or minorities and non-minorities who said, my advisor's a nasty person. It was very similar, or my advisor doesn't pay attention to me, or I have to really work to get my advisor to pay attention. There were no differences by these individual characteristics. And we were talking about systematic inequality. I think there are norms within organizations and within professions also that affect what happens. So one of the things that happens is that professors see themselves as sort of above the fray, and graduate students are here to help me, and they should get just big to get my attention, and so on. And it's a norm, so that when I get to be a professor, then others are going to have to do this for me. Well, this is the kind of thing it's hard to break because those are norms within the field. But again, graduate students can work together, undergraduate students can work together and say, you know, we really need to have you pay attention to us because your research is being hurt if you don't pay attention to us and if you don't help us. That may be much more than you want. It shows the long-lasting norms within professions, just as within we were talking about families and the role of mother and mother-in-law and daughter-in-law and so on. Once you become a professor, it's people will tend to behave like their professors behaved, and it's a hard practice to change.
Mhm. Yeah, that was actually very I wouldn't think that, because I feel like a lot of the times you take what you don't like and you try not to, become those traits. But I guess maybe it's just ingrained into us.
Yes, you are so right. Yes, yes, we always say, "Oh, I'm not going to behave like somebody else did," and but then it's a kind of learning that seems hard to alter. But
Mhm.
we can always change, and we know that. So, and we know that in the long run, things have changed, and we just need to keep working on it.
Mhm. So we've come to the end of the interview, and I would like to just ask you one more question. Because I do this YouTube channel for Gen Z, do you have any particular advice that you would give to high school kids all around the world, or maybe just in Saudi, about pursuing careers in STEM or in sociology in the future?
Yes. Well, again, I would say follow your passion. Actually, my children did not go into the social sciences. Well, one is a historian, but he also is a visual artist. One's a musician, one's a graphic designer, even though she was a math major in college. And then she got out of college. She thought, well, I really, really like my math. I really like art as well. And so she went to art school. And I really think that follow your passion. You will be able to be happy and you will make others happy. So I would really, that would be one piece of advice. And if you love science, do it. And don't, yeah. I mean, I love my science, my social science, and I do it. Yes. And these women I interviewed all around the world said that. And the other thing is what we were talking about earlier is reach out to others and support others. The work I've done on generational differences in health and mental health is very sobering, and there are entire generations that are hurting. And the data I have examined involves people from all over the world, and it's very, very important to work out and to reach out and to help others and support others. So this is marvelous that you're doing this YouTube channel and reaching out to people. I thank you for doing that. That's wonderful.
Oh, okay. Thank you for saying that. It's nice to hear people appreciate this.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
And I guess that is the end of our interview. Thank you,
Good.
Dr. Stockard, for being so clearly passionate speaker and having so much passion for your work. I also think your curiosity, I feel like the way you talk about your work shows that you're innately curious. And I feel like that's something that all scientists should, the trait that all scientists should have. And I really respect that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Okay. And that is a wrap.